First contact ended in disaster. Not a misunderstanding, not a mistranslated phrase, not some tragic collision of customs that historians could soften with careful words. The first ship humanity ever sent beyond neutral relay space approached under treaty lights, with its weapons cold, its hull open to every scanner in the system, and 3 minutes later, it was burning in silence, while 218 civilians, translators, medics, and diplomats were vented into the dark. The galaxy watched it happen in real time. They watched the human envoy vessel Ardent Promise break apart above the glass-blue world of Elir, watched its distress beacons pulse across the diplomatic channels, watched lifeboats deploy, and then watched those lifeboats get cut open by precision fire from the war escorts of the Varkesian hegemony. No one stopped it. No one intervened. The Senate feeds cut to commentary before the debris had even cooled. And on Earth, billions saw the same footage with no delay at all. That was the moment the old powers made their first mistake. The second came less than an hour later, when High Marshal Korvan of the hegemony stood before the conclave of species and declared that the killings were an unfortunate but necessary preemption against a deceptive primate war culture that had no place among civilized stars. He said humanity's arrival had been an insult. He said their rapid industrial expansion inside their own system was destabilizing. He said Earth would submit to inspection, orbital supervision, and immediate military disarmament, or be classified as an emergent threat. Most of the chamber did not agree with him, but they did not oppose him either, because the Varkesians were ancient, armored, and feared. Their empire stretched across 81 systems. Their fleets had broken republics older than human language. Their diplomats smiled with all the patience of executioners. And humanity, to the wider galaxy, looked painfully young. One star system, a handful of colonies, a merchant fleet, some escort destroyers, clever software, fast-growing industry, loud grief. Nothing more. That was what the galaxy saw. What the galaxy did not see was the way Earth fell silent. Not with panic, not with chaos. Silence of another kind. Traffic control grids shifted to emergency wartime routing. The orbital construction arms over Luna changed schedules and stopped broadcasting cargo manifests. Deep-range observatories went dark one by one. Naval channels vanished behind encryption so dense even friendly AIs were locked out of the upper layers. Across Mars, Callisto, Titan, and the black shipyards hidden beyond Neptune, crews who had trained their entire lives without ever speaking openly about why suddenly heard the same 3 words through their implants. Condition Atlas active. On the Senate feeds, humanity pleaded for justice. Their ambassadors demanded sanctions, reparations, criminal trials. They played the death screams from the Ardent Promise without censorship. They named every victim. A child linguist from Nairobi, a surgeon from Sao Paulo, a retired pilot from Manila who had volunteered because she wanted to see another sky before she died. They made the galaxy sit with each name until polite species began turning their gaze plates away in discomfort. The hegemony mistook that for weakness. They mistook mourning for helplessness and discipline for fear. And when Earth refused foreign inspectors, when the United Sol Assembly rejected disarmament and called the massacre an act of war, Marshal Korvan chose to teach the upstarts a lesson before sympathy could harden into alliance. Varkesian fleets crossed into the outer Sol approaches under the language of quarantine enforcement. They seized 2 mining stations in the Kuiper. They jammed civilian relays around Titan. They boarded a hospital convoy and detained everyone aboard, including children born under ice domes who had never seen Earth with their own eyes. Then the images came back. A nurse kneeling on steel decking with a shock collar around her throat. A human boy no older than 10 being shoved toward a bulkhead by a Varkesian marine whose armor weighed more than the child did. An officer reading the terms of temporary protective occupation while the station's dead were still lined in blankets against the wall. That crossed the line. Until then, some species still believed the crisis could be contained. The Marathi offered mediation. The Juno Ascendancy proposed monitored talks. Even inside the United Sol Assembly, a few delegates begged for time. But once the hostages were taken, once the hegemony planted its flag over human civilian habitats and broadcast that Earth had 72 hours to surrender all strategic assets, something final passed through humanity. Not rage. That would have been easier for the galaxy to understand. It was resolve. The response that went out from Earth was almost painfully calm. Secretary General Amara Voss appeared on every major frequency with no insignia behind her, no cheering chamber, no swelling music. Just a black suit, a tired face, and eyes that had stopped blinking enough. She informed the conclave that the Varkesian hegemony had committed murder under truce, piracy under flag, and hostage-taking against civilians. She requested immediate withdrawal from Sol space and release of all detainees. She gave a precise deadline. She stated that if the deadline expired, humanity would act in accordance with the defense authorities reserved under interstellar law and older sovereign doctrine. Then she added one sentence that translators across the galaxy rendered with unusual difficulty. "We asked for recognition," she said. "You have mistaken that for permission." The deadline was mocked before it had half run out. Varkesian commentators joked about Earth's ceremonial navy. Analysts displayed neat little threat circles around known human hulls and concluded the numbers were impossible. Human visible strength, according to every intelligence estimate worth naming, was inadequate even for local parity. Their largest warships were too few. Their colonies were too dispersed. Their industrial tonnage looked civilian-heavy. If Earth had secret assets, they could not possibly matter at scale. Ancient empires did not fear hidden programs in young systems. Ancient empires had seen too much. Then, one of their occupation squadrons vanished. No warning, no distress burst, no survivors. One moment, 6 Varkesian cruisers and their screening vessels were holding station beyond Titan, and the next, their tactical signatures folded into static. When the hegemony recovered sensor residue, it found only impossible geometry burned across the local vacuum, and a few drifting fragments sliced so cleanly their internal decks looked polished. The official explanation was reactor cascade. 20 minutes later, a second squadron disappeared near the Trojan lanes of Jupiter. This time, nearby telescopes caught something. Not clearly. Just enough to spread panic through command circles. Vast shapes slipping between sensor blind spots with emissions lower than background radiation. Attack vectors that came from nowhere and everywhere. Kills so fast the Varkesian ships never completed threat designation. The footage reached Marshal Korvan aboard his flagship, and, for the first time since the massacre, he stopped smiling. He ordered a full assault on Earth. The hegemony's first spear entered the inner system in battle formation, and that was when humanity stopped hiding. It began at the edge of the Oort cloud, where old comets and dead rock drifted through lightless distances no empire had cared to map in detail. Objects long dismissed as debris changed course. Heatless masses the size of mountains turned toward the sun. Camouflage fields opened like peeling night. Thousands of drive signatures ignited in perfect mathematical sequence, not with the bright roar the galaxy expected from war fleets, but with cold blue flares so efficient they looked unreal, as if the vacuum itself had cracked and let stars spill through. From behind Pluto came battleships no foreign registry had ever recorded. From the shadow of trans-Neptunian shipyards came carriers wrapped in armor kilometers thick. From hollowed asteroids, from artificial moons, from black stations buried in dust and ice, from generation-old vaults whose existence had been denied even within human politics, the Sol Defense Reserve emerged in wave after wave after wave, until the tactical overlays of 3 neighboring empires simply failed under the weight of new contacts. It was not a fleet. It was a revelation. The galaxy had known humans as ambitious merchants, adaptable diplomats, relentless engineers. It had not known that a species born beneath a single fragile atmosphere had spent 2 centuries preparing for the day the stars came calling with teeth. Long before first contact, humanity had nearly destroyed itself. Nuclear fire, resource wars, machine rebellions. Near collapses survived by hours and luck and the sheer refusal to die. Every victory had branded the same lesson into their institutions. If help does not come, you become the help. If the dark is full of monsters, you do not pray harder. You build something bigger. So while alien probes watched the bright worlds and counted obvious shipyards, human strategists had built the Atlas Reserve in silence. Not for conquest, not for display, for the oldest fear in their blood, that one day someone would come across the void and decide Earth was small enough to hurt. Someone had. And now the answer was moving. The first full recording of the reserve reached the conclave through 6 independent observatories. Senators who had spent decades navigating the slow arrogance of old empires sat speechless as formation after formation rolled sunward. Dreadnoughts bearing names from drowned languages. Arsenal ships carrying enough missile mass to darken worlds. Escort screens moving with machine precision around civilian evacuation lanes they had clearly plotted years in advance. At the center of it all, larger than anything short of a mobile habitat, came the flagship Resolute Dawn. Its hull scarred on purpose, plated in memorial metal reclaimed from every major war humanity had ever survived. The name of the fleet's commander spread just as fast as the images: Admiral Elias Trent. He had never attended galactic summits, never given interviews. Most foreign intelligence services were not even certain he existed. But when his face appeared on open channels, gray-haired, narrow-eyed, collar sealed, the entire network quieted. He did not rant. He did not posture. He simply informed Varkesian Command that all occupation forces in Sol were now encircled. All hegemony navigation keys inside the system had been compromised, and all non-combatant escape corridors would remain open for exactly 11 minutes. Then he said, "Return the hostages and withdraw, or I will remove your fleet from history." Marshal Corvan laughed when he heard it. He did not laugh for long. The Battle of the Inner Veil began above the orbit of Mars and was over before most civilian feeds could patch into live coverage. The hegemony expected a frontal exchange. They got anatomy instead. Human electronic warfare blinded their outer sensors. Decoy swarms split their target priorities. Relativistic kill vehicles, launched weeks earlier and hidden as industrial traffic, came screaming out of transit cones and punched through the rear logistics spine of the first Spear before its battleships even rotated to meet the main threat. By the time Varkesian gunners opened up, their ammunition tenders were vapor, their command relays were dead, and their flagship formation had been divided into isolated pockets by collapsing fields of hard light mines. Still they fought. The hegemony had survived too long to break at the first blow. Korvan drove his central wedge straight toward Earth, gambling that the humans would protect the homeworld at any cost and open exploitable gaps. What he found instead was a layered defensive geometry so disciplined it felt less like battle and more like judgment. Human ships did not chase glory. They did not waste movement. Each one seemed to know precisely how expendable it was, precisely where to die if dying bought one more second for the larger design. And then came the reversal no one forgot. Korvan's flagship, the Iron Saint, broke through the outer cordon with 4 heavy escorts and entered Luna's kill orbit. For a moment, the galaxy thought the line had cracked. Billions on Earth looked up at the sky where enemy weapons now had firing angles on their cradle world. Varkesian channels erupted in triumph. Senators began drafting surrender contingencies. Even some human colonies sent final messages home. Then, Luna opened. The old mining scars along its dark side equator split apart, and from inside the moon rose a ring of concealed artillery emplacements so vast they had been mistaken for geological anomalies for 50 years. Magnetic lances, buried in bedrock and fed by reactors sunk deep beneath ancient regolith, discharged as one. White spears crossed space. The Iron Saint's shields held for less than a second. Its prow vanished, its spine bent. Its escorts disintegrated around it in silent cascades of metal and atmosphere, and the flagship that had led 3 extermination campaigns spun apart over the world it had come to terrify. The feeds caught Korvan's face just before transmission died. Not anger, not hatred, understanding. After that, Varkesian resistance changed shape. What had begun as domination became survival. Cut off from resupply, outmaneuvered at every burn, occupation units across Seoul started broadcasting surrender codes. But some commanders chose spite instead. One garrison on Titan rigged the civilian domes for vented. Another threatened to execute the hostages aboard the hospital convoy unless granted immediate passage out of the system. Humanity answered each crisis with the same brutal precision it had shown in open battle. A team from Earth's orbital marines infiltrated Titan through an ice fracture maintenance shaft in vacuum conditions that should have killed them 3 times over. They reached the demolition spine with 40 seconds left, killed the garrison commander in the dark, and sealed the dome before pressure drop reached fatal levels. On the convoy, Admiral Trent did not negotiate. He flooded the ship with tailored interference that blinded Varkesian suits, then launched breaching pods through exact weak points in the hull so cleanly that half the hostages did not realize a rescue had begun until human soldiers were cutting their restraints off. The recordings spread like wildfire through every language network in known space. Humans storming corridors under controlled fire. Humans carrying alien children out beside their own because civilians were civilians, even now. Human medics treating wounded enemies after battle while the wreckage of the hegemony still burned outside the viewports. That was when the 3rd great mistake of the galaxy became obvious. They had assumed humanity's danger began with violence. It did not. It began with memory, with loyalty, with the terrifying fact that once humans decided someone was under their protection, treaties, distances, and casualty projections stopped meaning very much at all. Systems that had stayed neutral began denying Varkesian ships fuel. Border states quietly opened intelligence channels to Earth. The Marathi, shocked by what the hegemony had provoked, released archive material proving Varkesian planners had intended occupation from the first day of contact, regardless of diplomacy. The Senate, sensing the tide, condemned the massacre at last. Sanctions were proposed, arrest warrants drafted. Speeches bloomed everywhere. all of them late. Humanity ignored them and kept advancing. The Atlas Reserve did not stop at defense. Once every civilian in Sol was secure and every hostage accounted for, Trent pushed outward through the relay corridors the hegemony thought unassailable. Human fleets moved with chilling preparation, as if they had gamed these routes for decades. Fortresses fell not from brute force alone, but from information warfare, logistics interdiction, and a merciless understanding of how empires actually breathe. Fuel depots were seized intact. Communications ministries found their archives exposed. Shipyards lost power before their defenders knew they were under attack. Worlds that had feared a human counter-genocide instead saw military targets struck with surgical intensity and civilian grids left untouched. That frightened the galaxy even more. A species that answered atrocity with blind slaughter could be condemned and contained. A species that answered atrocity with patience, accuracy, and moral clarity was something harder, something colder. Humanity did not look drunk on revenge. Humanity looked like it had decided on a necessary task and would finish it no matter how long it took. 1 month after the Arden Promise died, the Varkesian hegemony sued for ceasefire. Earth refused. Not out of bloodlust, out of arithmetic. The officials who replied to the request attached a list of conditions. Complete withdrawal from occupied territories beyond Sol. Surrender of all commanders implicated in the massacre. Reparations to every family of the dead. Abolition of hegemony frontier slave levies that had been ignored by the Senate for generations. And the demilitarization of 3 major Varkesian fortress systems under external supervision. Until those terms were accepted in full, military operations would continue. Many in the galaxy called the demands impossible. Then humanity captured the fortress system of Halcyon in 19 hours. Halcyon was supposed to be unconquerable. A triple-ring bastion with enough fixed guns to break armadas. But human cyber teams had seeded its civilian procurement networks with dormant code weeks earlier, during the chaos after first contact. When the assault came, internal targeting corrupted, drone bays locked, and half the station crews discovered their life support remained functioning only because the attackers allowed it to. The message was impossible to miss. Humanity had not merely built a secret fleet. Humanity had studied the galaxy while pretending to beg entry into it. The hegemony broke after Halcyon. Governors started defecting. Client species revolted. Corvan's surviving loyalists tried to regroup around the throne world of Varkus Prime, but by then, even they knew the shape of the end. Not because human guns were pointed at their capital, though they were. Not because their fleets were shattered, though they were. It was because every empire around them had seen the same thing and drawn the same conclusion. The age of casually crushing younger civilizations was over, because one of those younger civilizations had turned out to be humanity. The final session of the conclave convened under armed neutrality, with human warships holding station far enough away to be polite and close enough to be unforgettable. Delegates who had once spoken of Earth as a managed protectorate now waited for the human representative to enter before they dared take their seats. Amara Voss walked the same floor where the massacre had been excused, past the gallery where commentators had mocked human grief, and stopped at the center dais beneath a ceiling painted with the victories of species older than any nation on Earth. No one interrupted her. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. She spoke of the dead from the Ardent Promise by name again, one after another, until the chamber felt smaller with each syllable. She spoke of Titan, of the hospital convoy, of the children held under occupation law by soldiers who had called themselves civilized. She spoke of how often history had taught powerful states that distance excuses cruelty. Then she looked directly at the remaining Varkesian envoys and said the thing that froze the recorders. "You thought we feared war," she said. "What we feared was becoming the kind of people who start one for convenience. You relieved us of that concern." The terms were accepted before the session ended. Korvan was surrendered in chains. Hegemony banners came down across 3 sectors. The reparations fund became the largest forced transfer in recorded interstellar history. Inspections of Varkesian military sites uncovered stockpiles for campaigns that had never yet been announced. Worlds that had lived under their shadow for centuries started breathing like survivors climbing out of rubble. And still, the part the galaxy talked about most was not the victory. It was the fleet. Where had it all been hidden? How many more reserves existed beyond the ones revealed? How long had humanity been preparing? Why had no one known? Traders traded rumors. Admirals lost sleep over tonnage estimates. Intelligence bureaus rewrote every model they had built around human behavior. Some claimed the Atlas Reserve was mostly spent, and Earth had shown everything. Others insisted what appeared in Sol had been only the outer shell of something deeper. Every government in civilized space suddenly found reason to improve relations with a species it had barely taken seriously a season before. Humanity did not clarify. They reopened diplomatic channels. They signed mutual defense accords with former neutrals. They helped liberated systems rebuild. They attended memorials for alien victims of the hegemony as readily as for their own. But when foreign delegations pressed for details on the reserve, on hidden infrastructure, on strategic doctrine, they were met with the same courteous non-answer every time. "Earth is secure," the statement said. "Friendship is welcome. Aggression is unwise." That might have been enough on its own. It might have passed into history as the measured arrogance of a triumphant newcomer. But months later, long after the war had ended and the stars had settled into their new arrangement, a salvage crew working the debris field of the Ardent Promise recovered the ship's final internal recording. It was sent to the families first, then to the Conclave archive, and from there it spread everywhere. In the last seconds before the first Varkesian shots tore through the hull, Ambassador Elena Ward had remained strapped to her chair while alarms screamed around her. One of the junior translators was crying. Someone off-screen kept repeating that they were under diplomatic protection. Ward looked into the bridge recorder, straight into the eye that would outlive them all, and gave the order to keep transmitting. "Make sure Earth sees this," she said. Earth had seen it. The galaxy had too. That was the secret at the heart of everything, the truth no empire had bothered to understand until it was far too late. Humanity did not reveal its strength because it loved war. Humanity revealed it because something precious had been harmed in front of them, because the line had been crossed in blood and broadcast light, and because once that happened, there was no power in the galaxy old enough, rich enough, or cruel enough to make them look away. From then on, every first contact protocol in known space was rewritten with one unspoken clause beneath the official language. Be careful with the humans. Not because they are fragile, not because they are offended easily. Because if you mistake their patience for helplessness, if you strike under truce, if you put your hands on their civilians and call it order, the stars themselves may open and show you what they have been hiding. And by then, it will already be too late. Humanity did not ask the galaxy to fear them again. It never had to.